Good evening, my friend. Settle in. I am Snorelock Holmes, your guide through stories, histories, and dreams. Before we drift, tell me in the comments which city you're listening from and which other historical mystery you would like me to unravel while you rest. Tonight's case is Rome itself. Rome, 753 BCE, the festival of Parilia. The Palatine and Aventine hills standing like patient animals in the morning light, Alba Longa's shadow still fresh on the horizon. The stakes are high. If the original augury, divine bird sign that chose Rome's founder, is proven a lie, rival factions will seize the moment to claim the gods for themselves, and the newborn peace with the Sabines could collapse into bloodshed by dawn. The central mystery is sharp and dangerous. A lost bronze tablet recording the omens from the day Romulus traced the boundary contradicts the official 12 birds for Romulus story. It hints at a third, forgotten hand. If that truth is twisted or buried, a city's vow could crack. But panic is a poor tool for a detective. So we breathe, and we begin. Chapter 1. Rain, Feathers, and a Knock. It was a rainy night, the easy kind that turns a city to soft edges. In my lamplit study, I was sorting feathers into neat, patient rows: raven, kite, and the odd gull that thought it was a hawk. I was building a small treatise on omen lore. Nothing grand. Which birds arrive first, which hold territory, which share the sky. A game to pass a wet evening. My clock ticked like a tame animal with a steady heart. The alley hissed and shushed as rain played the cobbles. The pages smelled of vellum and tea. My eyes were half-lidded and my hands knew the work without thinking. Quill, tag, small note in pencil. The room hummed with the comfortable silence between drips. Then the knock came, not polite. A shudder through the door as if someone leaned their weight and every last hope against it. I set down a raven, primary glossins, black, strong, and went to the latch. She stood there breathless, rain-plastered hair clinging to her brow, mud streaking her coat. Dr. Livia Orphée. I knew her by reputation. Sharp eyes for old lines in older soil, a name attached to digs along the Palatine's shoulder. Tonight, those eyes were wide and rimmed red. She clutched a water-warped map tube and a small linen-wrapped object in one hand, as if they were the only solid things left in a world sliding sideways. "They're watching the Palatine dig," she managed. Her voice was rough from cold and running. "They followed me. Laurel smoke. I had to..." The tube knocked the doorframe as her knees gave. I stepped forward and caught her under the arms. The linen-wrapped bundle bumped my chest once, and then was still. Her head tipped against my shoulder. She was light, the way the exhausted are, bones and a will that had finally set itself down. I brought her in, kicked the door closed with a soft thud, and slid the bolt. The room accepted us without complaint. I guided her to the settee by the mantel and eased her down, the map tube secure in my left hand, the bundle in my right. Her breath stuttered, then smoothed into something that sounded like trust. Rain went on murmuring, loyal to its own work. For a moment, I watched the tiny tremor her fingers settle. I fed the fire, coaxing fresh flame from tired coals, and the iron belly of the stove answered with a comfortable glow. I turned down the lamp just a touch. This study has held many cases. It was ready for another. I was ready too, though part of me still smelled damp paper and candle wax, and the faint ghost of pigeon oil from a mounted wing. I have learned that important knocks arrive when your guard is most harmless, when you are doing a quiet thing well and are willing to be interrupted. She stirred, eyes opening with the slow, underwater blink of a diver returning to air. Did I make it?" she asked. "You did." I showed her the map tube, intact. "And these?" I lifted the linen-wrapped shape. "That's the shard," she whispered. "A sliver from something bigger." She swallowed. "I think it was a bronze tablet under an archaic altar. A void, a pattern, and then the tunnel." Her eyes rolled with an exhausted memory, like a wave that wants to break but never quite reaches the shore. "He followed me," she said. "A man with a mask set with resin, burning laurel leaves in a little brazier. The smell. He didn't run. He watched. He let me see him. And then, when the street turned dark, I felt him behind me until I started knocking like a fool." "You knocked like a friend," I said. "Good." I set the bundle and the tube on a velvet pad on my desk, the same pad where endangered things rest until they tell me what they want. The rain stepped down a notch and became a hush. The clock's tick seemed to lean closer. In the lamplight, I could see the lines of grit on her cheek, where she had wiped away mud with the back of a cold hand. "Rome," I said softly, to set the stage for both of us. 7 hills, a morning of counting birds, the festival of Parilia. I watched her eyes, still wild around the edges, steady at the words. "Names are anchors. Tell me only what you can, and then sleep. I will listen to the rest where the rest is kept." She nodded and then slumped, quick as a bird folding its wing. The map tube waited, old river smare rising from the leather. The linen-wrapped piece gave off a faint metallic tang, like pennies and rainwater. My study was once again only my study, except that now it contained a line running back to a blue dawn and a furrow traced by a plowshare. I could feel it the way a sailor feels a current under a calm sea. It pulled in one direction with a patient hand. I turned to the desk. The velvet pad was ready. The case had arrived. Chapter 2. The Tablet and the Thread. When a client collapses, you don't interrogate the sleep. You let it do its work. I settled a blanket over Dr. Orphe's shoulders, put a log on the fire, and turned to the map tube. The stopper was stiff with damp. I eased it out with a small twist and pull. The leather creaked like an old door in a friendly house. Inside, a roll of heavy paper exhaled a smell of charcoal and wet wool. I uncurled it on the desk, weighting the corners with paperweights shaped like little lions. The rubbing showed circles within circles, as if someone had pressed charcoal across a bronze plate engraved with rings. Concentric lines, precise and steady, the way a man draws when he thinks the gods are noticing. Along one edge a simple plough symbol, 2 triangles and a line, bare as if carved by someone whose first language is earth. Around the circles, notation marks dotted the space. Short, straight strokes like tally marks, but not Roman numerals as we know them. These marks leaned at odd angles, their spacing too even to be casual, a code of an older day. I traced one group with my fingertip and felt the faint grit of ground charcoal on skin. I set the rubbing aside and reached for the linen bundle. The knot was simple, a square knot, not a sailor's flourish. Whoever tied it wanted it to hold, not impress. The cloth opened to reveal a bronze sliver the length of my thumb, green-black with old time. It had a deviled edge on one long side, as if it had once fitted into a socket. Along its face were incised signs, 3 birds in a 1+2 arrangement above a shallow, curved line. Goat graceful birds, just strong strokes, a craftsman's sign for wings and a tail. Above the curve, above the furrow, if that's what the line was, 1 bird separated from 2. A clear pattern, simple enough for a shepherd to read at dawn. There was beeswax residue along one edge, dull and brown with age. It had collected in the bevel and under an old chip, leaving a film as thin as memory. On the back, tiny letters peered through the patina. F-A-V-S-T. And then the break. The rest was gone, but my mind supplied the missing tail of the name the way a river supplies its own sound. A Faust something. Faust. The letters were narrow and careful, like a name scratched quickly with a sharp nail while no one looked. I lifted the shard to my nose. It smelled of damp metal and laurel from a distance that was not physical. Sometimes old things carry echoes like that. Beeswax, laurel smoke, fresh soil, 3 scents that belong to rites more than to tombs. Behind me, Dr. Orphe shifted and sat up slowly, the blanket slipping to her lap. I poured her a cup of hot water with honey, nothing stronger yet. She took it in both hands and breathed the steam. "You said an archaic altar?" I prompted. She nodded. We were doing a night survey, thermal imaging under the Palatine. A void showed under a big unshaped stone near the Lupercal. Wolf bones have been arranged there for the tourists for years. We found a narrow tunnel. Someone dug it ages ago and reinforced it with planks. We slid in, only one at a time. Her eyes grew there again, in that tunnel. There was a cavity under the stone. The edges were smeared with old wax, and I thought, that's odd. Who seals a stone base? So I put my fingers in and felt a socket. We couldn't pry the stone from above without ringing alarm bells with the site monitors, so I took a rubbing of the bottom. She gestured to the charcoal image on my desk. You can see the rings, and there, she pointed, the plough sign, and here, these notation marks. They're not numerals in the later style. They're the kind of tallies we see in early hut urn motifs. And under one side of the cavity was that little bronze sliver. It must have broken off a plate when someone tried to lift it, long, long ago. I rapped it, and when we were backing out, the tunnel settled. We barely made it before it collapsed. "And the man?" I asked. I came up to the street with mud all down my arms and my heart in my mouth. I put the rubbing in the tube. I hid the shard. And then I smelled it. Laurel smoke. She touched the bridge of her nose. Sweet and oily. I'd smelled it earlier, drifting from the Palatine, someone's brazier maybe, but now it came from behind me. I turned, and a man in a half-mask was leaning against a doorway. He didn't look away when I looked at him. He just watched, and then followed, far enough back to make me feel foolish if I ran. I cut left, then right, but he stayed like a shadow. When I reached your street, my legs made the choice. She smiled with embarrassment and then let it go. He wanted me to know he was there, to hurry or scare me, or both. Laurel is a priest's kind of smoke. Augurs burn it to scent the gods to the right place. I nodded. And what do you think you found? She swallowed and then said it plainly, like a field note. An augural tablet. A record made the morning Romulus traced the boundary of Rome. It doesn't just show 12 birds. It shows a third sign before Remus and before Romulus. That 1+2 pattern. One bird first, two together after, above a furrow. And those letters on the back? Fi Ki Vist. The foster father's name begins like that. Faustulus. She looked at E over the rim of the cup. If this is true, the story changes. The founding isn't just a duel between brothers crowned by a king's bigger flock. It starts with a shepherd's hand and a quieter omen. Her words fell into the room like clean pebbles. We both watched the ripples move out. I spoke for the listener, who might be tired and halfway to dreams. Rome's story, as the Romans told it later, is this. Romulus and Remus, twin sons of Mars and Rhea Silvia of Alba Longa, were set adrift on the Tiber by a usurper, Romulus. The river carried them to a cave called the Lupercal, where a she-wolf nursed them until a shepherd, Faustulus, and his wife Acca Laurentia took them in. They grew, toppled the usurper, restored their grandfather Numitor, and then chose to found a new city where they had been saved. They argued hills. Romulus chose the Palatine. Remus chose the Aventine. They turned to augury, reading of bird flight as the gods' will. Remus saw 6 birds first, claiming priority. Later, Romulus saw 12 birds, claiming authority by number. The dispute soured. Romulus began to mark the city boundary, the pomarium, with a plough. Remus mocked the low wall, leapt it to show contempt, and was struck down. The city rose under Romulus's name. He made an asylum for outsiders, seized Sabine women during games at the Consualia festival, and fought a war with Sabines under Titus Tatius. In the end, peace. 2 peoples united, 2 rulers sharing power. Romulus and Tatius. I tapped the bronze sliver. Your shard suggests there was a first moment before that famous contest. A shepherd tracing an acceptance furrow at dawn, and a quiet bird, maybe a kite, circling twice. 1, then 2. A pattern that says begin rather than win. If that was recorded and then later covered over, it's not just a cute footnote. The first hand to draw the line matters. Law and story would both bend. Dr. Orphe nodded. And if someone wants to use that bending to spark a fight, or to claim the gods bring favor to only one side, they could. If they reveal only part of it, or burn the rest to erase what doesn't help them, we could watch a legend turn into a match. Her eyes glinted with the tired anger of a person who has watched politics chew on careful work. I can manage looters. I can't manage a priest with a brazier and men with knives. Lucky for us, I said with a smile, you could rest your head on. Managing priests without raising knives is a specialty of mine. But not while awake. Sleep is my ticket to where this story is kept. I set the shard back on the velvet pad beside my sprig of laurel. The sprig left a faint resin on the fabric. I looked at the letters again, Eve Vesti, like a whisper behind a curtain. Rest, I told Livia. You've earned it. I will go where you cannot right now and see what the dawn kept. She looked at the window, where rain drew fine vertical lines on the glass like the strings of a gentle instrument. Please, she said, with more relief than command. She folded into the settee again, and this time the sleep took her fully. The fire kissed the log and sighed. I turned the clock's face away so its eyes would not watch. Then I prepared to leave the room without moving at all. Chapter 3. Smoke to river, chair to saddle. There is a way to step from here to then without tearing anything. It requires respect. It requires a focus to hold as you cross. Tonight, I had what needed. I cleared a space on my desk and set the bronze shard on my velvet pad, angled just so that the 1+2 birds were looking out at the room. Beside it, I laid my laurel sprig, fresh and cool, a line back to the sacred. I lit my pipe not to smoke it, but to watch the first ribbon rise. Poppy-seeded tea drowsed in a cup and sent up a forgiving heat. I took a small sip and set it down. Then I picked up a length of cord and tied a shepherd's loop. Not my neat detective knot, but the simple, honest loop with which a watcher might tether a goat to a stake. I held the loop and felt its memory of pulling and giving, holding and letting go. The ritual matters less than the attention you pay to each step. I paid attention. The room answered in the way rooms do when you respect them. It softened, and it leaned in to listen. I sat in my chair and let my spine lengthen, the way a reed straightens when a frog leaves it. The rain whispered against the window pane and turned to a more distant sound, like a memory of rain rather than the thing itself. I watched the smoke from my pipe. It rose and curled and then seemed to change temperature before my eyes. It cooled. It grew damp in a way that smoke never does, unless it is becoming something else. I closed my eyes and breathed with the river's pace. In for 4, out for 6. Each exhale let the present loosen like a knot undone. The chair arms under my hands changed grain, not vanished, but shifted. Wood to leather, polished by palms harder than mine, by years of grasping and lifting. The brass lamp's glow thinned and warmed until it felt like a low sun wrapped in evening. The floorboards creak under my heel turned to a soft pack of earth under a bare foot. The crackle from the stove gentled itself into the light clatter of goat bells on a hillside. The clock's tick slowed until it was not a tick at all, but the slow drip of water from a stone in a cave. I smelled damp soil cooling from a hard day and smoke fresh from green wood. Laurel moved in the air like a hand through a curtain. Poppy tea became the comfortable weight of a small leather bag against my hip, its strap digging in the way a necessary tool digs in, trusted but felt. I brought the shepherd's loop up to my chest and held it there. The cord was rough against my thumb. I could feel where it had caught and rasped against my nail. I kept breathing. In for 4, out for 6. And then the moment arrived, the one that feels like stepping with your heel into water you know will be cold, and finding that it is the exact right temperature. My hands fell to my sides, and the room opened. I opened my eyes onto a world rinsed in dawn blue. The Palatine slope lay under me like a broad shoulder. Scrub oak and wild thyme knotted through the soil, and the thyme released a pepper smell when the breeze nosed it. Reed-roofed huts hunched close to one another like family in a chill. Thin hearth smoke stitched up into the morning, straight and clean. A fox skittered out from behind a stone and cruised across a track with its head low and its eyes busy. My feet were bare and pressed on dew-wet grass that held the cold with careful patience. I wore a plain wool cloak, rough on the neck, and my hands were the hands of a craftsman with small cuts and ingrained dust. The saddlebag at my side sagged with a little weight wax, cord, a bone tally, things a man might carry when he plans to notice things. To my right, the cave mouth of the Lupercal breathed a cool draught that smelled of stone and animal. Wolf bones hung as if set there by a careful, proud hand. Above the slope, the Alban hills caught the sun like honeyed bread. And there, where the ground opened to a view of the sky, men gathered with laurel sprigs in their hands, and faces tilted upward, counting. Even from a distance, I could hear the low murmur of numbers and the sharp, brief laugh of a man who sees and wants to be first to say so. Across the valley, the Aventine rose. A small group stood there too, their silhouettes crisp against the brightening edge of the morning. Birds cut the air between the two hills, indifferent and perfect. The marsh at the bottom, a place that would one day be the forum, breathed peat smell and frog song. The air held a promise, and also a blade. The world had that charged quiet of a moment just before it knows it will be written down, and somewhere downwind, so faint it was only there when the breeze turned its cheek, came the scent of laurel burning in a brazier. The hair along my arms settled, not from fear, but from recognition. There was work to do and time to do it. I am the calm center of other people's storms. I stepped forward, grass cool underfoot, eyes soft and open. Rome waited to tell me how it began. Chapter 4, in which laurel smoke and birds mark a hidden hollow, I arrived barefoot on the Palatine hill, Rome before Rome, and the ground met me the way an old friend does, cool, steady, and not in a hurry. The damp grasses were beaded with dew. My toes pressed the pearls. The air held peat from the marsh that would one day be drained into the forum, and the cave at my left breathed a pleasant chill across my ankles. That cave was the Lupercal, the place where a she-wolf was said to have fed two boys, Romulus and Remus. I listened to the small water inside it. It moved like a slow whisper. The sun was lifting itself over the Alban hills, the color of honey warming in a bowl. On this hill, on this exact slope, men would say a city began. The date tied to this myth is 753 BCE, the festival of Parilia, a day for cleansing fires and the safety of flocks. That anchor matters. When we say the founding of Rome, we point to a precise ritual, a plough furrow, an omen, a boundary. I repeated that in my head like a calming line of music. Here on the Palatine, a boundary could save or break a people. I did not come to stroll. The smell of laurel smoke stung my throat. I followed it as gently as I would follow a thread through cloth. At the top of a small rise, near the cave mouth, a brazier smoldered. The smoke moved in a tight ribbon, rich with resin. A man in a mantle of raven feathers stood behind it, chin high, eyes hard, Sabine-born augur I had been warned of. Volasius. He carried a curved staff, the lituus that augurs used to mark a sacred slice of sky and count the birds that flew through it. Volasius didn't see. Not at first. He was directing a handful of rough youths, farm boys turned enforcers, who combed through shepherds' huts near the Lupercal, tipping baskets, kicking clay jars, looking under skins. They muttered, "Where is the plate? Where's the writing?" One boy dragged out a mat stuffed with straw, shook it and sniffed at a twig. Volasius lifted a palm and the boy stood still in the smoke like a rock in a stream. This was the pressure at the heart of the case, visible and plain. The man wore the night's work on him, ash in the lines near his mouth, a tightness about the eyes that comes from scheming in a small circle and not sleeping. The laurel in his brazier told me he had been staging rites to hide his tracks. Laurel burns with a sweet and bitter scent that clings. If you breathe it in, you remember it. He wanted memory to be on his side. I kept to the wall of scrub oaks. My body in the dream was that of a nondescript craftsman. Plain cloak, steady feet, hands that knew tools. A good form for not attracting attention. As I passed the cave brink, cool air rose from the Lupercal again. I let it touch my cheeks and asked a small, useful question. What would a man using beeswax need? Warmth. A clean surface. A place not obvious. Beeswax is a simple sealant. Augurs and priests used it to fix metal plates to stone and to coat writing. I found the spot a few paces down the slope where the laurel smoke thinned. A flat, unshaped stone sat half-cradled in earth. It looked like any other fieldstone. Ordinary is a perfect disguise, but the soil around it was a little loose, as if the rain had settled after a hand had been busy there. I knelt and placed my fingertips on the stone's cold face. They came away with a faint grey smear. Laurel ash. Old find. I slipped my fingers into the soil at the stone's lower edge and felt the rim of a shallow void. The void's mouth had been sealed with something that adhered and then flaked. Beeswax. You learn the feel. It gives under pressure, then flakes like bark. Inside the rim, the stone's underside had tool marks, regular, shallow angles. They were the kind a careful metalworker leaves when he evels an edge to seat against another edge. My hand remembered those marks from the waking world. The bronze sliver on my desk at home had that same bevel pattern along one side, cut to nest into just such a socket. 3 small white spots sat on the stone's upper face, and they were not random. Bird droppings are not usually evidence, but augurs watched birds so closely that even a bird's most basic trace can echo a ritual. These 3 spots formed a clear 1+2 pattern. 1 isolated near the upper left, 2 close together toward the lower right. It was as if the birds had been coaxed to perch and mark a simple count. A single glossy raven feather had drifted into a crack down the stone side. It lay like a black accent on an otherwise pale sentence. Felicis's boys kicked another jar. Voices carried. I slid the stone gently back onto its seat and pressed the soil around it the way a shepherd pats a dog, calm and fur. Then I brushed my thumb over the ash on my fingertips and brought them to my nose. Laurel's resin sang to me again, not pine, not oak, laurel, the plant. Apollo's tree later, but in this story, a priest's prop. A youth came close enough that I could see a scar under his eye. He had straw on his tunic and a habit of turning his head before he moved his feet. He jerked his chin toward me, but I kept my posture loose. Men looking for trouble often overlook the man who looks like he belongs to the ground. "Ho," he said. "Seen any plates?" "Only for cheese," I said, easy and dull on purpose. I gestured at my cloak. "Not a priest, just a hand." He snorted, the way standing boys do to feel older. He went on. My heart did not speed. It has been trained by worse nights than this. I waited, breathing slow, and counted to 12, then back to 6. Romulus and Remus had argued over those numbers. Numbers calm me when the air is busy. When the youth was gone, I crouched and placed my palm flat on the earth over the void. The ground there held a small memory of heat. It was not hot. It was the memory of hot. Beeswax retains warmth longer than soil. Someone had lifted the stone not long ago, let the brazier breath touch the rim, and fixed something, or removed it. I murmured names aloud to steady the history in place. Romulus on the Palatine, Remus on the Aventine, the augury contest, the fence line, Pomerium traced with a plough, the bronze tablet with its omens engraved, the lost piece. The danger was clear. If an augur like Valesius produced a fragment that cut away Romulus's claim and ignored what came before, it could give Titus Tatius the excuse he needed to attack, while the talks over the Sabine women were still tender and raw. Tension would roll downhill into blood. But panic is a poor tool for a detective. I took a breath. A low, cool sound slipped through the oaks. Not human. A kite, a light, fork-tailed hawk, sliced across the slowly brightening sky. It barely moved its wings. It turned over the Lupercal twice. Silent. The old men would say a kite favors beginnings. I watched it. One loop, then a second. It was the pattern I had come for without knowing I would see it. I let the sight rest in my chest like a warm coin. A woman's voice spoke from behind the home oaks, quiet and sure. You do not smell like laurel smoke. I didn't turn fast. I kept my hands open and still. No, I said. I don't. The oaks moved in a small wind, and the woman stepped into a triangle of light. We were not alone on this hill, and the hill was not empty of watchers. But this woman's gaze held more care than suspicion. She was young, mid-20s perhaps by my waking world's count, with clear grey-brown eyes and a coil of dark hair under a simple veil. Her dress was linen, belted with braided cord. A chipped amber wolf pin held the veil. She was Hersilia, a Sabine woman whose name the future would speak with a calm kind of honor. She was not the threat. She was the witness. Before anyone could put their attention on us, she tipped her head toward the lower slope where a spring slid out from under the roots of the home oaks. Come to the water, she said. If you are not theirs, you will hear better where the ground drinks more than men do. I rose. I kept my pace even. The kite hung above us one more heartbeat, then drifted beyond sight. The laurel smoke stayed, though, a faint ribbon that the oaks did not break. I walked beside Hersilia toward the spring's cool shimmer, holding in my mind a neat stack of facts. A void under a fieldstone with a beeswax rim. Laurel ash residue, a raven feather, and a 1+2 pattern of droppings on the stone's face. The city's beginning was talking in very small letters. Chapter 5, in which Hersilia speaks of a kite and a furrow. The spring under the holm oaks made a thin music, the kind of sound you can drink with your ears. Water that runs over stone always calms a crowd, even when the crowd is only two. I crouched and cupped my hands. The water was cold enough to wake a sleepy artisan. I washed the ash smell from my fingers and felt the beeswax flakes loosen and slide away. Hersilia watched the surface of the pool instead of my face. It told me she had seen too many men who only watched faces. "You do not look like their kind," she said again, softer. "Verles's boys spit laurel when they speak." "I prefer plain wood to wreaths," I said, "and simple knots." I showed her the cord at my belt. "I keep a shepherd's loop tied when I sleep. It helps me hold on to the thread of a dream." She noticed the knot as if it were a word in her language. Her hands were steady. Red ochre dust stained her fingertips, deep in the whorls. Ochre is the color used on boundary lines, on votive cloths, on the rims of small cups, when people want the gods to notice a promise. She wet her own fingers and rubbed the ochre into her palms as if making bread. "Women rose before dawn today," she said, eyes still on the water. "We leave offerings for births, pulses, bread, oil. This day is for the flocks and for safe mothers. We came to the Lupercal before any man climbed the hill to count birds, before any braziers were lit. I let the present stand. If you give a witness space, they offer you clean lines instead of tangled ones." Hersilia glanced uphill, then back to the pool. "A shepherd stood there," she said, chin lifting toward the cave mouth. "He is wide in the shoulders like a gate, with hands cut by rope. He traced a shallow furrow on the ground with a stick. Not deep, just a first touch, as if asking the earth, 'Will you take a line here?' A kite turned over the cave twice. No sound. Only 2 clean circles, then it went beyond the oaks." She tapped her fingers together. "We saw it, the women. We said nothing to the men, because men forget that women see sky too. They think we only see loaves and babies. But a quiet bird that turns twice can be a say. Old women told me the kite is for beginnings, for the first agreement." The shepherd nodded to the bird like he knew. "The shepherd has a name," I said. "Faustulus. The foster father who found the twins. The man whose care kept Romulus and Remus alive. Saying his name here felt like placing a small weight on a piece of cloth so it would not blow away." Hersilia's eyes lifted to mine finally. "You know him?" "I know he carries the city in his hands without wanting to be called king," I said. "And that he would draw a furrow shallow so it could be moved if the gods said no." She nodded. The pool made its soft voice again. After the kite, the men came. Remus counted first, fast on the Aventine. 6, he shouted. He wanted the first claim. Romulus waited and claimed more. 12, he said from this hill. The Augurs argued with their bird staffs, and then the sticks were traded for spears in their mouths. "My husband," she paused, and I understood the kind of breath a person takes when they are about to put something true into the world. "My husband will return with Tatius for talks. If Verlessus has a sign that makes Romulus look like a thief of omens, he will urge Tatius to break talks and strike. We will meet with spears because of a quarrel over birds." I let the weight of that sit. It did not press me down. It pressed me into clarity. In this dream, the stakes were not a scholar's footnote. If the old augury was twisted, then men with shields would push into men with ploughs. And the women who had been taken at the Consualia would stand between them, or be trampled by both. This was the hinge of the story that made Rome what it would be. War turning into union because the women insisted on peace. But you cannot get to the peace if someone poisons the path with a lie. Hersilia reached into her pouch and drew out a slim piece of bone strung on a cord. It was smooth, with thumb use. She held it out. The cord was tied in a shepherd's knot, the same knot I had tied in the waking world before sleep. That small echo made the hair on my forearms aware of the breeze. The bone smelled faintly of red ochre. On one side, 3 notches had been cut, 1 slightly apart, then 2 together. 1 plus 2. Archaeologist keeps tallies like this, Hersilia said. For bread, for lambs, for the number of times a bird circles without sound. She pressed this into my hand when I told her what we saw and said, "Keep it. I cannot be everywhere. But you can speak if men forget that domes are built from small bricks." Laurel, foster mother of the twins, called the she-wolf by those who like a knife's edge in a joke. Hersilia spoke her name gently. I turned the bone tally in my fingers. The niches were carefully cut. The 1 plus 2 grouping matched the pattern on the stone's face near the Lupercal and the way the kite had flown. It also matched the marks on the bronze sliver in my waking study. 3 birds engraved, arranged 1 plus 2 above a shallow curved line that looked like a furrow. The tally was a small, friendly bridge between a woman's mourning and a city's founding myth. "May I keep this for a short while?" I asked. "It is not mine," Hersilia said, "but all such things are ours. Keep it until sunset. Then give it back to Acca's hands." She wiped her own red-stained fingers clean in the spring, and then rubbed the water up along her arms like a blessing. She watched the oaks again and lowered her voice. "Volissus burns laurel all day and all night now. He says it sharpens his sight. I think it smears it. It leaves a smell you cannot miss. He sent his men to the shepherd huts because he smelled beeswax and thought of writing. He learned that trick in a city where men write on bronze and pretend stone does not remember without letters." "Stone remembers," I said. "Hands remember, and women remember. I only collect the remembering into a pile we can all see." Hersilia let herself smile, quick and small. "You speak like an old pot with a clean rim," she said. "It pours without spilling." She tilted her head and then looked past my shoulder. A line of youths had come down from the upper slope, their feet careless with the side of a hut. The one with a scar under his eye pointed toward the spring. The boys had been told to watch for anyone who was not one of them. Hersilia stepped back into the taller grasses and lowered her veil over her hair. I leaned to the water again, splashed my face with a worker's roughness, and made a show of rubbing my neck as if a task waited uphill. One of the youths barked, "You two, stand!" He strode toward us with the walk of a dog who isn't sure it wants to bite and hopes no one notices the doubt. "We stood," I said. "Now what?" My voice stayed flat, mild as a field. The youth's eyes flicked past me to Hersilia. Recognition tightened his jaw. "Hersilia," he said, "Volissus will want to hear your dawn tales." She didn't flinch. "My tales are for women and for the god who hides in the grain pits," she said. She meant Consus, the underground god tied to storing food. His altar lay buried most of the year and uncovered during the games. "You can tell Volissus I am filling water, and if he does not want thirst, he should let me do it." She lifted the clay jug at her knees. Authority can be quiet and still be authority. The youth sneered, because he didn't like not being obeyed without a show. Then he grabbed for her veil. His fingers caught only air because my hand met his wrist in a shape I learned a long time ago from men who make rope. I pressed the bones in the right direction. The hand opened. No harm, just a decisive reminder that wrists need their nerves. "Careful," I said softly. "You will spill more than water." His eyes, close and young, tried to decide if that was a threat. It wasn't. It was a standard caution in a dangerous place. He hissed through his nose and drew breath to shout. I tilted my head toward the marsh. "If you want to chase a woman through reeds with that jug in your way, fine. But Faustulus told you to find righted. The writing is in a jug. The writing is under stones and in wax, here, on the upper slope." I kept my voice mild but certain. The boy's hunger for praise was stronger than his desire to bully. He hesitated just long enough. "Go," I said. "We are at your words. Your words are uphill." He looked toward the oaks, wavered, spat near his heel, and left. The other youths followed, their attention tugged by the Augurs' mantle like birds on a string. Hersilia lowered the jug, then lifted it again. "You make space like a shepherd with a good dog," she said. "Come. There is a place where reeds swallow men who want to be big. We will walk there." We walked. The spring joined a small rivulet that slid into the marsh between the Palatine and the low place that would become the Forum. The ground cooled underfoot, and each step made a soft, sucking sigh. The day's light grew but stayed tender. A goat bell clinked from a hillside near the huts. The laurel smoke was still on the air, behind us now, like a bad thought that couldn't keep up. "Tell me, Hersilia," I said as we entered the reeds, "where do people put things when they wish them to be safe from men who like to stand in the open?" "Into the wet places," she said, "where grain gods listen, where men in feathered cloaks do not like to go because it muddies their hems." She said it with a hint of humor. She did not hate Faustulus, she just refused to respect his hems. We bent our heads under low branches and let the reeds hide us. My hands held the bone tally as if it were a key. It was, in the way a small notch can open a lock made by gossip and fear. Rome's founding was not a whisper anymore. It was being said out loud, and I intended to say it whole. Chapter C, in which the marsh keeps a secret and danger wades in. The marsh at the foot of the hill had that mild tannin tea scent that comes when water sits with old leaves long enough to lose any hurry. The reeds rose taller than a man. They made a soft hiss when a breeze moved through them, like a crowd calming itself. We kept our steps slow and our weight forward on our toes, so we would not gurgle with every move. Behind us, a horn called once from the slope, and then a drum answered. Games would be held later for Consus, the underground god of stored grain and hidden things. Romans in the later centuries would still honor him under mounds and covers. Today his altar lay near, a low block that men uncover with a ceremonial show. Right now it was wet and half sunk, a kind of island in leaf-brown water. The Forum Boarium, a cattle market, sat just beyond this damp. Cattle make paths that last for centuries. Humans call them roads. Faustulus' men swept the slopes in a clan of rough lines like geese. One of them, throwing his eyes farther than his feet could go, caught sight of Hersilia's veil through the reeds. He pointed, and 3 boys splashed down off the dry ground, their feet making that sound wet earth makes when it takes a man's ankle as a small tax. They liked taxes when they collected them. They didn't like paying them. I touched Hersilia's elbow. "This way," I said, and slid my weight along a reed wall. The wall bent and sprang back without noise. For a minute we stepped in the same short pattern. Heel up, toe forward, weight down smoothly. The water came to mid-calf, then knee, then back to ankle as the ground rolled under it. We did not hurry. Panic makes a person heavy. Calm makes them light. "Snorelock," Hersilia said under her breath, looking at my hands. "That is what you are called?" "Yes," I said, "because names help people feel anchored when the reeds move." "Snorelock Holmes. It makes you sound like a pillow," she said, but unkindly. "A pillow with pockets," I said. She made a thin smile and then smoothed it away. The shrine we needed sat where the marsh met the bank near the cattle path. It was a crude rectangle of planks making a floor under a low roof of woven branches. It had slumped and leaned over time and wetness. A small wooden figure had long ago fallen from its niche, face rubbed away by fingers. What mattered was the floor. It had been built with care, even if it sagged now, close-fitted boards with a central plank that was darker than its neighbors. I stepped onto the nearest board, felt its rot decide we were allowed, and shifted my weight to the darker center plank. It gave the way a board does when someone has lifted it many times. I slid a thin reed under the edge, levered it up on a breath, and laid it aside. The smell rose, beeswax, old and warm even in the wet. It holds its scent longer than it holds shape. The socket cut into the next layer of wood was neat. The edges had been smoothed to take a bronze plate without cutting it. The socket's rim was lined with a film of beeswax and ash, and with a few grains of red ochre molded into the wax by fingers. I put 2 fingers into the socket and pulled out a small earthen thing that had once been dry. It was a votive cup, unglazed, with a scratch of letters on its side. Faustulus, the last letters lost where the clay had chipped. Faustulus, the shepherd foster father. Hersilia drew in breath through her nose, but did not speak. Men fill silence with noise. Wise women let it stretch a little, and then say something neat. She said, "Faustulus brought it here." Or "Aca I said. But the hand on the scratch is clumsy, as if the knife was used by a man who holds rope at pens. And the laurel ash here is the same as at the Lupercal stone. It ties the sights. I held the cup so the wet light fell across the letters. Look, Roman capitals as later centuries would carve them, but early long strokes that announce sounds in a plainer way. Hersilia touched the lip of the cup with one finger. She smudged the ash to uncurl it. "Faustulus would put it where Consus listens," she said. "He hides good things in pits. This altar belongs to him. Consus, the underground god. The Romans later said his altar was buried most of the year and uncovered for feasts. It makes sense. A city is as much about storage as it is about show. You store grain, you store truth. When truth is dangerous, you sink it and mark the place with something small, like a cup, with a shepherd's scratched name." The boys in the reeds floundered, then swore, then laughed to bite down on the fear of losing a boot to mud. Their bodies grew larger in the corner of my eye. One lifted his spear to tap a reed wall, and instead tapped a small mud turtle riding a tuft of grass. The turtle blinked harder than the boy did. The boy swung loose and nearly fell. Hersilia breathed through her nose with patience. I looked at the beeswax skin lining the socket again. I thought about the bevel pattern under the Lupercal stone. I thought about the 1+2 pattern on the stone's face. Then I thought about Velasus's habit of burning Laurel. He carried his sight like a badge. He could not help but leave a trail of scent. He likely moved the bronze plate from the cave area to here, or from here to there, using his brazier to soften the wax. But this cup told me the plate had once rested here, deliberately, not just as a passing stop, and it told me who blessed that resting, a shepherd whose care was quiet but firm. The three boys came into the shrine space like men walking into a low room they kept forgetting was low. One bumped his head. The nearest lifted his spear. From where we stood, we were at arm's reach, but the plank floor was slick. I held the cup in my left hand and raised my right palm, empty. "We are praying," I said. "You can stand quietly, or you can fall into the water. Either way, you will not touch this place with angry hands." "Velosus says," the boy began. "Velosus says many things," Hersilia said, voice smooth. "But he knows Consus has ears under the ground, and that men who shout near him lose sheep for 3 days." She said it with the seriousness that children respect. The boy cut his eyes to his friends as if to find help in their faces. He did not. They were thinking about lost sheep. Velosus would not spare them if the numbers were down. "We will tell him you went into the marsh," the boy said, lowering the spear point. "That is all. We did not chase. The water is not good for my sandals." "That will be fine," Hersilia said. "Your sandals deserve better." She meant it. She did not waste contempt on them. They backed out, making a show of not being in a hurry. The reeds swallowed them and gave back the hush. I set the cup back into the socket for a breath so I could feel the way it settled. Then I lifted it again and slid the board back into place. The hiding of something must be as careful as the finding. I tucked the cup into my cloak, wrapped in a cloth to keep the damp off the letters. We slipped out of the shrine and into a cluster of willows where the ground firmed. I spoke the deduction that sat on my tongue like a coin ready to drop. The bronze plate was not only at the Lupercal. It lived here for a tie. Whoever recorded the omens of the founding day set the plate where Consus would watch over it. That person was friendly to shepherds, and he scratched his name into a cup, Favstl Faustulus. Hersilia looked toward the hill. "Then Velasus is protecting the truth. He hunts it, planning to use one part and burn the rest." She folded her hands in front of her waist. "He will tell Tatius that Romulus's 12 came late, that the gods favored priority, that Remus should have ruled, and that Sabine's must set it right. He will leave out Dawn," I said. "He'll leave out the first, humble line. He'll leave out the way a shepherd asked the earth for permission before any count, and the way a kite turned twice, quiet. He will pull one thread from a braid and call it the rope. If he keeps control of the bronze, he can carve a new end on it." "Can you stop him?" Hersilia asked. Not panicked, practical. "Yes," I said, "by telling the whole story in a place where both Romulus and Tatius have to listen. Even an Augur's mantle cannot smother a plain sentence spoken to a crowd who has eyes." Above us, on the dry ground, men shouted, "The Sabines approach!" Drums thudded on the hill. It was not battle yet. It was movement carrying noise in front of it. The noise moved like a low wave across the slope. The consuls of later Rome would order such waves into lines. Today, the lines were braided families and allied bands, testing one another with glances and the way they held their spears. Then we should think whether God's words can be heard, Hersilia said. On a day for Consus, I said. At his altar. At sunset, when the swallows move and the sky changes colour slowly enough for all to see, I could feel the plan planting itself. I have done this often, arranged a stage where truth is shown without a shout, where the proof is simple enough that even a proud man can accept it without losing face. She nodded once, then she gave me a different gift. Archaeologia will stand with you if you ask. Faustulus will stand if Arca stands. And Sila, Romulus's captain, may listen if you are empty-handed and not a priest. Good, I said. We will need a polished shield. Hersilia raised an eyebrow. To fight. To mirror the sky, I said. It will show birds to a crowd without forcing their necks to turn. It turns augury into a shared sight. We left the marsh and walked along the edge where dry ground began again. My mind now held a clean line of tasks like pebbles. Keep the bone tally. Guard the cup. Find a shield. Borrow a stone. Gather Acca and Faustulus. Send word to Romulus and Tatius. Draw Volasus to a place where his own laurel ash can testify against him. And do it all by sunset, when Consus's games would cover speech with flute music and laughter, making it safe to say dangerous things. The day had warmed. The honey light of morning stretched into something clearer. The Palatine grasses brushed our knees and shivered at the easy wind. Somewhere, a fox trotted, its feet soundless as it cut its own neat line between shrubs. I like foxes. They mind their own business, but notice everyone else's. I felt a kinship. Chapter 7, in which 3 omens become one story. We found a thicket where cicadas leaned into their steady work, and the ground held our steps like a careful hand. This was the place to settle the mind and count. I carry a method into every dream, lay out the pieces in plain speech. The brain, even closed to the day, likes order. I set the bone tally on a smooth stone and the small cup beside it. The letters on the cup's side, FAVSTL Dush, caught the light in the softest way, like a scratch in butter when the knife has been warmed by hand. I laid a small twig to mark north, because a man should always know where the sun is in his head. Let us say the names, I said quietly, including Hersilia. We are on the Palatine Hill in the year the Romans will call 753 BCE. It is Parilia, the festival for flocks and for fire that cleanses. The twins, Romulus and Remus, argue over which hill to found on. The augury contest sets priority against number. Remus sees 6 birds first on the Aventine. Romulus claims 12 later on the Palatine. I spoke slowly and with pauses. A listener half asleep can hold only so much at once. I have learned to pour in small cups. Before that, Hersilia said, nodding to the tally, a shepherd draws a shallow furrow, and a kite circles twice without sound. Before that, I said, the Lupercal cave receives the breath of a god and raises 2 boys with a woman's milk and a man's bread. And before that, Alba Longa pushed these boys into a river, and the river refused them. When you make a line of cause and effect, you anchor the present to the past, and make it less scary for the mind. I walked the logic out loud. Because the stone near the Lupercal has a beeswax rim and laurel ash under it, and tool marks that match a deviled metal edge, a bronze plate was once seated there. Therefore, a record was kept at the cave site. Because there are 3 fresh droppings in a 1+2 pattern on the stone's face, and a glossy raven feather tucked in its crack, the ritual there has been repeated or revisited recently. Therefore, the site is active in the memory of people who know augury. Because Hersilia saw a kite circle twice at dawn as a shepherd traced a shallow furrow, and because Acca Laurentia's bone tally bears 1+2 notches, those who care about omens recorded a quiet first sign before the men's loud counts. Therefore, there is a dawn omen missing from the later story. Because the half-submerged shrine's board hides a socket with beeswax and red ochre, and because a votive cup with Favstl was tucked under it, a man named Faustulus or his household placed a witness to the plate's presence, away from the hill, under the care of Consus, the god of hidden things. Therefore, the plate was deliberately moved or copied in a way that kept shepherd voices in the story. Because Velosus's brazier leaves a distinctive laurel ash, and I smelled that ash both at the stone and at the shrine socket, he moved or tampered with the plate. Because he uses laurel smoke to create a ritual scent wherever he works, he believes smell is part of persuasion. Therefore, he intends to reveal or destroy the tablet in a controlled way and to shape the audience's memory. I let the chain sit and cool. So I said, "What do these pieces form?" Hersilia leaned her shoulder against the thicket's trunk. 3 omens, one after the other, she said. Dawn. The kite turns twice, and the shepherd makes a first line. Morning. Remus claims priority with 6 birds. Mid-morning, Romulus claims authority with 12. I nodded. The bronze tablet did not make a false king. It recorded a process. It told a story of foundation that belonged to 3 hands. A commoner setting the first intent, a challenger staking the first claim, and a leader making the larger count. Later, political augurs erased the first hand because commoners complicate neat tales. Volesus plans to use this erasure or his own selective telling to push Titus Tatius into action. He is disloyal to all the truth, only to the part that helps him. That is a kind of treason some men call piety. Hersilia stared out through the thicket at the oaks beyond. If Romulus hears that a shepherd began the line and accepts it as part of his foundation, she said, then sharing rule with Tatius will not be a humiliation. It will be the city's design. If he hears only that his 12 came second and that the gods love first sight more than full sight, he will fight. We must make first sight and full sight stand next to each other in the same sentence. I said, we will do it in a way that does not force a proud man to kneel, but invites him to extend a hand. I picked up the bone tally and ran my finger along the first notch, then the 2 that sat together. I will show this sign to a crowd that includes both leaders, and I will fit iron and stone pieces in a way that even men who don't like omens can understand. You will need more than a bone and a cup, Hersilia said. Yes, I said. I will need a mirror to show the evening birds to many eyes at once, a polished shield. I will need the stone from the Lupercal with the beeswax rim to prove the plate had a home. I will need Acca Laurentia and Faustulus standing beside a plain plowshare to say with their bodies, Humble hands began this. And I will need the moment when people are already together, half distracted by games, and open to being guided by a picture in the air. Her jaw softened at the edges. Consus at sunset, she said. Flutes and food and children. Men are easier then. I smiled. She had done this before, told difficult things when listeners were held by something gentle. I made a mini recap for myself, because in a story like this, the head can feel thick with threads. Here we are in plain English, I said, my voice even. We are in early Rome. A lost bronze tablet recorded 3 linked omens. A shepherd's dawn furrow, with a silent kite circling twice. Remus seeing 6 birds first, Romulus seeing 12 birds later. A Sabine augur named Volasus moved the record and plans to reveal only what helps his people seize power. If he does, the fragile peace after the abduction of the Sabine women will break, and men will die. Our plan is to show the whole truth at sunset today at the games of Consus, where both Romulus and Titus Tatius will be. We will use simple proofs: a shield to mirror birds, a stone with a beeswax rim, a bone tally with 1+2 notches, and a cup scratched with FAVSTL. We will invite the people who anchor that truth, Faustulus and Laurentia, to stand by a plowshare. We will let the crowd see and decide, so no single priest can trap the story. I felt the thicket shade deepen, cicadas soft soared at the air. My breath synced with them, steady. There is strength in a slow cadence when the world jitters. What about Romulus? Hersilia asked. He will not stand and watch you take his brazier of ash and his power to name. I will give him a better stage, I said. I will tell him the tablet will be shown not at Consus, but at the Tarpeian Rock. The Tarpeian Rock later becomes a place of punishment, named after Tarpeia, a betrayer, but even now it is a cliff that makes men's stomachs feel hollow. He will bring his brazier there. I will be elsewhere, letting his laurel ash speak without him when I sprinkle it into water and show its peculiar shimmer. Is it peculiar? Hersilia asked. Every plant's ash has a signature, I said. Laurel's is sharper in the nose and leaves a glove sheen in water that reeds do it like. It will match the residue under the Lupercal stone. She nodded again, weighing this in her way. Hersilia was careful. Not slow careful. Then we should fetch Acca, she said, and find a boy with a mirror on his arm. A shield, I said. Find Selar or one of his youths, the ones who polish for pride. Selar will like the idea of using a shield to reflect a sky instead of a spear to make one. She smiled properly this time. He will not admit it, she said, but he will like it. She collected the bone tally and placed it in my palm. Keep it, she said. It is the pendant for your knot. We stepped out of the thicket. The sun stood past noon now, tipping toward afternoon. My plan had formed its spine. What I needed next were feet and hands. It is a myth that detectives work alone. I never have. I walk best when other people walk with me in their own ways. Chapter 8. In which I set a stage for truth at sunset. The slope changed its color as the afternoon went on. The grasses went from green to the muted gold that you see when your eyes are half closed but not asleep. Men drifted toward the low place where the games would be, carrying small baskets and curiosity. Children rose on their toes to see whether anything interesting would begin. Flutes warmed up in the hands of boys who wanted to play loud, and women who knew better. I began to build the stage for what I had to show. I say stage, and you may picture a platform. There would be a simple one later. But the stage, Irenus, is a weaving of people and objects and expectations, so that when the moment comes, the truth lands like a soft stone in a basin and makes rings that touch everyone. First, I sent Hersilia to Achaia Larentia. Ask her to bring the smallest, plainest plowshare she has, I said. Tell her to smear it with red ochre. It will not be for cutting earth. It will be for drawing a thin, visible furrow across the platform. Akka would understand. She knew the double language of tools and ritual. She would understand that a plowshare on a platform is not pretend. It is the city itself in one edge. Next, I found Faustulus. He was where shepherds usually are, at the edge of a crowd, watching as if counting is a kind of caring. His face had the lines of sun and wind baked into it, and his hands were nicked in the old places. He held his crook like a tall man holds a walking stick, lightly, as if it weighed less in his grip. I approached him not as a herald and not as a priest. I went as a craftsman who knew what it was to carry weight without wanting a title. Faustulus, I said. He turned his head toward me, the way a dog raises an ear when it hears its name from a trusted mouth. We must stand the truth in the open this evening, I said. Not a war truth, a we belong together truth. Will you stand beside Akka with a plowshare on a platform and let the crowd see your hands near the line of a city? His eyes creased with what might have been humor. He did not ask me if I was mad. He did not ask why a stranger asked him to stand before two men with armies. He asked the practical thing. Will there be shade? Yes, I said. A little. He nodded. Akka will ask if there is water nearby. Yes, I said. There will be a bowl. Then we will come, he said. A man should never say no to water. He glanced across the valley toward the slope of the Capitoline. And not much good comes from the rock, he said, meaning the Tarpeian rock. Men fall from it in stories. Not tonight, I said. Tonight, the rock holds only a rumor, and Valasus will chase it like a dog after smoke. Faustulus grunted and turned his shoulder toward the Lupercal as if he could smell the laurel from this distance. His ash will cling to him in the dark, he said. It always does. I left him to his steady watch and found Sella near the training ground that would one day be more orderly than it was now. He was a compact man, with a scar like a thin twig under his cheekbone, and the stance of one who rested by choosing to be still, not by sitting. When I approached, he narrowed his eyes, then decided I was better to listen to than to arrest. I need a shield, I said, polished like a mirror. I am not going to fight with it. I am going to show birds to men who do not know how to look up without thinking of war. Birds, he said, flat, not mocking. Yes, I said. This evening, 3 swallows will likely move together above the altar at sunset. 1 will separate, 2 will follow. The 1 plus 2 that you learned as a boy without knowing it was a count. I am going to angle the shield to catch them and throw them onto the ground in light so the crowd sees what I see. Then I will draw a furrow with a plowshare in red ochre to match the curved line, and I will fit a stone to a socket to show that a bronze plate once lived at the Lupercal. Sela looked at me the way a tired man looks at a puzzle he does not have time for. Then he nodded once and lifted his own shield enough that I could see my narrow face in it. It was polished to a mild gleam. Return it without dents, he said. Better than a dent, I said. It will carry the sky for an hour. That made the corner of his mouth move half a measure. He handed it to me as if handing me his own name. Trust, given grudgingly, is often the strongest kind. With shield on my arm, I climbed back toward the Lupercal. The boys were thinner up here now. Crowds tend to pull soldiers away from sacred nooks. Near the cave, I set my shoulder under the flat stone with the beeswax-rimmed void and eased it up with the slow control a man uses to lift a sleeping child. Stone complains if you rush it. I slid a flat wedge under the edge to hold the weight and revealed the socket. Its beeswax ring had held its shape under the cool earth. The laurel ash around it chimed in my nose. I took a small clay bowl from my bag and pressed it into the earth, then scraped a line of ash and wax into it with a smooth stick that would travel with me to the games. Proof doesn't need to be large, it needs to be well placed. I lowered the stone back into place and brushed the soil in a wiper's steady arc. When I stepped back, the ground looked as it had, not disturbed, not neat, just normal, which is a kind of invisibility you can only achieve by caring. On the path down from the hill, I sent a runner small-footed, a boy who knew both camps, to Romulus with a message for Sela. Come unarmed to hear an omen. Men in charge will sometimes send underlings to risky meetings. But Sela would come because hearing is a risk to a man who has a spear, even when he is touching it. I sent another runner, a neutral herdsman trusted by both sides, to Titus Tatius. Come hear the gods in the open. He would come because not coming would make him look like a man afraid of a bird, and that is a garment a leader wears. He would come with a handful of guards. I counted that on my fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, and Sela makes 5. Numbers steadier. Then I walked up the path toward the Capitalian's shoulder and found a boy whose face Valasus did not know. Run to the Tarpeian rock, I said, with this whisper. At dusk, the full bronze tablet will be displayed for 20 heartbeats and then withdrawn. Only Valasus may interpret it. Do not let anyone but one of Valasus's men hear you. Boys who like trouble for good reasons have a particular brightness in their eyes. This boy had it. He grinned and ran. By the time I returned to the low place where the games would be held, the sun had begun to lean. A simple platform had been raised near the uncovered altar of Consus. A rope held back the press of bodies in the most gentle way that rope can. Flutes trilled. The mood lay in that sweet in-between where people's chests are open for breath and their hands are full of food they plan to share. Acca Laurentia stood near the platform with a plowshare in her hands. She had smeared it with a finger of red ochre, just as I asked. Her hands were strong, her feet set. She gave me a long look that a mother gives a stranger who has asked to borrow her hammer. If this breaks my boys' heads, I will find you, she said. It won't break heads, I said. It will open them. Good, she said. Men make too much noise in their skulls. She lifted the plowshare. Where? Here, I said, and laid it on a low table beside the shield. Hersilia joined us, hair neat under the veil again, chin forward. Faustulus settled himself at Acca's other side, his crook planted as if it were an extension of his spine. I poured water into the clay bowl that held laurel ash and beeswax scrapings and set it on the table as well. The sheen that floated to the surface was subtle but real, kind of oil glow that rippled away from the ash as it released its memory. Scylla came with 5 men, unarmed but not unready. He looked like a boulder that had learned to move as quietly as a cat. Romulus came later, with his jaw tight and his eyes taking the edges of people in as if weighing them for armor. Titus Tatius arrived with his own handful of men, faces set to not give anything away. The 2 leaders stood as spears cast apart, neither of them with their hands on their weapons, which was the point of my message. At the edge of the crowd, a braid of black feathers moved. Phalessus, drawn by the false whisper, had gone toward the Tarpeian rock. One of his boys lingered near the platform instead, eyes on everything and the laurel smoke smell on his cloak, even though there was no fire at his side. Good. His presence would be enough for the ash to have an owner. I placed my hand on the polished shield and tipped it to feel the weight. The metal held my face in it like a puddle might. Above, swallows traced lines in the thinning light, rehearsing their evening swoop. They were not the piece yet. But they would be. Hersilia touched the bone tally in my palm. When you lift your hand, she said, I will stand where women can see me without guessing whether I am yours or theirs. I am both. That will do. That will do, I echoed. I spread the cloth over the votive cup, scratched FAVSTL, and tucked it against the low bench so it could be revealed cleanly. I rested the plowshare flat and nicked a thin red line into the soft wood of the platform, a shallow curve to mirror the shallow curve on the bronze shard I had left in my waking study. The line shone like a thread in dusk's fabric. The flutes lifted in volume, and the first long shadow slid from the platform into the crowd. I looked at Romulus. He met my eye as he might notice a slightly odd bird among common ones. I looked at Titus Tatius. He looked back, as a judge does, not committing, waiting for evidence. The platform waited under my feet like a held breath. We were positioned, Acca Laurentia and Faustulus on either side of the plowshare, Hersilia within sight of families, Scylla at my shoulder, shield ready. A bowl of laurel ash water catching the light. The Lupercal stone's story caught in the curve I had drawn. The cup under cloth. The runners gone. The Sabine priest chasing smoke at the cliff. The city to be holding its breath in a collection of men and women and children with their eyes softening in the evening. This is the calm before a very gentle storm. Not the kind that tears roofs, but the kind that turns a field's color and lifts a scent from the ground that makes you remember where you were when you first felt safe. I filled my chest with air and let it out slowly. My plan sat ready, a soft machine, one push and it would begin. We would not be loud, we would be precise. And in a city that would later prize loudness, precision would carry the night. Chapter 9. 3 swallows, 1 furrow. Sunset poured like bronze over the low field. The makeshift platform by the altar of Consus was only a few planks on trestles. the kind that creak if you stamp, but hold if you stand your ground. I stepped up quietly, the boards ticking under my bare soles. The air was warm, the day's heat sighing out of clay and grass. Flutes trilled, thin as reed stems in a breeze, and the games that had roared so loudly an hour ago softened to the murmurs of a sated crowd. I positioned the polished shield on its edge against my thigh, the surface bright enough to drink the sky. Beside me on a low table sat the small ploughshare Hersilia had smeared with red ochate. The stone socket we had carried from the Lupercal, still tacky around its rim with ancient beeswax, waited like a mouth expecting a tooth. Hersilia stood to my left, hands folded, chin level. Acca Laurentia stood to my right, feet planted, her weight steady as a millstone. Faustulus rested one hand on his crook, eyes mild, as if watching lambs in late light. They were the quiet center of what would follow. Across the aisle of trodden earth stood two men who could not afford to show nerves. Romulus, jaw like a squared-off block, his laurel branch still green in his hand. Titus Tatius, stern and straight, an olive wood staff in his grip. Behind them, a handful of guards each, a polite number for a gathering that might become far less polite if words went wrong. And at the far edge, half in shadow, Valasus kept to the fringe with his raven-feathered mantle drawn close and his brazier lit at his feet. Laurel smoke crept upward, resin sweet and sharp, threading the evening. I raised one hand for quiet. I did not call for silence. It found us on its own, the kind that comes when a crowd leans forward as one body. "Friends," I said, my voice low and even, so they would have to listen rather than be shouted at. "You know why you are here. You know what hangs between you. The day is Parilia, the night draws on, and we stand between old quarrel and new vow." I nodded to Romulus and to Tatius by name, as equals. We will look up, and we will look down, and we will call the story whole. I tilted the shield and cupped its rim with my palm until the sky lay in it like a wide blue-green pool. Dusk birds skimmed above us. The flutes paused. Even the horses at the edge stopped shifting their hooves. Swallows favored the lower air where insects glimmered. Light thinned. Then 3 swallows cut the sky in a neat pattern, as if they had rehearsed it. 1 separated and curved high. 2 followed lower, pairing close, their twin shadows slipping over my hand. I angled the shield so the crowd could see their trace, and with a bit of ochre I had warmed in my pocket, I drew on the platform a shallow, curved line, a furrow, bright red, simple as the first stroke a plough makes in spring soil. 1, I said, tapping the high edge of the line I had drawn, then 2, before 6, before 12. The sky shows the old order when we ask. It has always shown it. We only learned to listen. A ripple moved through the people. Some crossed themselves in the way of their ancestors. Some simply breathed out. I let the quiet deepen until it felt like the top of a held breath. I reached down to the velvet-lined tray where the bronze sliver lay, twin of the shard on my waking desk, and I held it up so it caught the same last light as the shield. The green-black patina drank the glow. The incised marks. 3 small birds in a 1 and 2 group above a curve showed themselves like water lines in dry clay. I turned it in my fingers so all could see. "This is a fragment," I said plainly, "not a rumor, not a song. A piece of the bronze plate that sat beneath the Lupercal stone on the morning when omens were counted for this place. I touched the beeswax rim of the socket stone with one knuckle. Plate once lived here. I brought the sliver down and, with deliberate care, slid the bevel into the old wax. It met with a low, satisfying click, the kind of sound that tells you a key and a lock have known each other for a long time. Even from a little distance, you could see the match. Old grooves to old grooves, cut to cut. People craned. A shepherd in the front nodded once. The sound of a horse shaking its head jingled and then stopped. I didn't hurry. Panic is a poor tool for a detective and a worse one for a priest. I laid the polished shield flat so the softest birds could still skim it with their shadows, and I lifted the small votive cup I had kept beneath a clean cloth. The cup was plain clay, water dark, scratched with letters that ran like a line caught halfway. Favstl. I held it to the light. Faustulus, I said, giving the name its full measure. The shepherd who bent low over two boys and took them home. The same hand that holds this crook here now kept the first furrow straight, while the sky decided the rest. I nodded to Faustulus. He did not bow. He dipped his chin, and his eyes were gentle. Hersilia's voice carried without force. I saw a lone kite circle twice before every count, she said. I saw a man bind earth to order with no priest to write it down. If that first line is part of the city's making, then women and shepherds are part of its right to be. Her words didn't sting, they settled. They were not an accusation. They were a memory told aloud. The crowd allowed that in, like a room opening a window. I bent and lifted a small bowl of water. It was river water, clean enough. I had taken laurel ash from the altar and from Valasus's brazier while we waited. The resin smoke in his coals had a distinct shimmer when it touched water, a sheen like oil. Though to every laurel does that. Some smell peppery, some smell sweet. His smelled like sharp resin and left a prismatic film across the surface. I knew the signature because I had seen it beneath the Lupercal stone mixed with beeswax and earth. I had seen it again, fresh, on the verge where the socket had been pried up. I held the bowl so the first ranks could see. I sprinkled ash from the altar. The water clouded and then cleared, a plain grey dust settling. I sprinkled ash from Valasus's brazier. The water took on that faint, silken shine, a rainbow skin gliding and holding. I tipped the bowl a bit so the light could ride it. Only your brazier does this, I said, keeping my voice mild. Only the laurel resin you favor leaves this gleam. This ash was under the Lupercal stone. This ash was in the niche by the Boarium shrine where the plate had been set. You moved the plate, Valasus. You planned to move truth with it, to show a piece and hide the whole. Valasus did not step forward. His chin lifted. His eyes were narrow, slits gone darker with the falling light. He could have tried to turn the crowd with a curse or a clever phrase, but the moment had become heavy in a way that resisted tricks. The first furrow lay red on the boards. The swallows had drawn their living figure above us. The shard sat home in its old rim, indifferent to politics, and the name beginning on the little cup had the stubborn warmth of bread broken among friends. Romulus's hand tightened on his laurel branch. He looked at the furrow. He looked at the bronze. He looked at the old shepherd who had kept boys alive on goat's milk and patience, When he spoke, he sounded like a man having decided something he had resisted, and finding it made him larger rather than small. "If a shepherd's hand began the line, and my hand took it up," he said, his words short, almost gravelly, "then the city doesn't rest only on kings. It rests on those who hold steady while kings count birds." He turned to Titus Tatius, and I watched pride and calculation meet in his face and make room for peace. He extended his arm. "Two rule for one people," he said, not a shout, a sentence that wanted to be an oath. Titus Tatius measured him with his amber eyes, the way a judge tests the weight of a claim. He shifted his staff to his other hand and took the offered forearm, their grips locked, skin to skin, the opposite of a strike. It was not affection, it was agreement, which is stronger. A soft noise moved through the crowd, not triumph, relief. Some men lowered their spears because their shoulders suddenly felt their own weight again. The flutes found a quiet tune. A woman somewhere let out a breath she had held since dawn. I looked to Volasus. He stood very still. The brazier glowed at his feet, the laurel smoke no longer a weapon, only a smell. He could have made a scene, but scenes require an audience that still wants to be tangled. This one had untied itself. He lowered his eyes. When he spoke, it was with the cool blankness of a man setting aside a plan because it had failed, not because he had changed. "The signs are what the people will carry," he said. "Let them carry this." He made no apology. Priests do not apologize. But he let his men slip away along the edge with him, the feathers on his mantle dull in the dusk. Acca Laurenia reached for the shard and the cup with sure hands. "Women will keep what men would crush," she said to me, not unkindly, simply true. I nodded. We wrapped the bronze and the votive in clean cloth and laid them beneath the low altar of Consus, the god who keeps what is stored. A shepherd's god, a god who knows how to wait. I drew my finger once along the red furrow on the boards. The ochre stained my fingertip. The line was straight. It was enough. The flutes picked up their tune. Two boys ran past and then slowed, embarrassed to have run, and then giggled because no one scolded them. The sky darkened to a good blue. The shield at my thigh reflected a single star, and then another. Chapter 10. Peace like a field after rain. Morning came as it does, with the clean smear that follows a night of honest weather. The slope above the old swamp, ground that would be the forum, showed footprints crossing and recrossing, but no skirmish marks. The day after and the day after that, blades stayed in sheaths. Men spoke in normal voices. The air felt higher in the chest, as if someone had opened a shutter you had forgotten was there. I walked the early paths and watched small changes take shape. They are the ones that matter. Hersilia moved among women with a pouch of red ochre and a basket on her arm. She spoke to a Sabine girl, then to a Roman mother, then to a grandmother whose grandson slept on her shoulder. They touched the same piece of cloth, smoothed the same hair. They were now making a treaty. They were choosing the same quiet. I saw Hersilia pause by the low step of a hut and set down a cup of water for a pregnant woman whose ankles were swollen in the heat. "We will bring the offerings together," she said, and the other woman nodded and sipped and looked less alone. Romulus held a council where he did not stand higher than the others. He and Titus Tatius shared a bench that two men had dragged into the shade. Scylla stood behind them, eyes watchful, and even he let a breath out. Half the names called were Sabine, the other half were Latin. They spoke of practical things in a way I like, how to divert a trickle so a puddle does not become a pond, how to wattle a wall so a goat can't push through, where to put the first proper stones of a drain so the wet field would turn fur. To build a city, you handle water first. They did. A line formed near the rough hall that would be the asylum. Men who had slept under hedges came forward with their hats in their hands, or their hands empty, which is the same thing. A battered Etruscan who had lost his place with a caravan. A runaway boy with a scar below one eye and straw in his hair. A herdsman with a limp. The rule was simple. If you want in, you drop your old feud at the door and take up the walls. You do not have to be good yet. You only have to decide to be part of something. The gatekeeper, whose eyebrows grew in a single line, said, "Name?" And when a name did not come, he said, "Then we will call you by what you can do." A city makes people into more than a loose hunger. It gives the hunger a task. At the edge of the Capitoline, the cliff that would bear Tarpeia's name lay quiet under morning sun. Word of the girl who had bargained in shadows had already spread. People spoke her name softly, not to savor it, but to set it down where it belonged. She asked for what they wore on the left arm, a man said, and glanced at a shield and a bracelet. Acca Laurentia, passing with a skin of milk, answered without slowing. "Say it softer," she murmured. "Let it be a warning, not a flag." The cliff kept its shadow. It would keep the name because people need the edge they fear to have weight. Yet that day no one leaned over it for a thrill. They gave it distance. They walked on. I visited the Lupercal in the cooler hour before noon. The cave breathed a little, as it always does, its stones cool even when the world burns. Wolf bones hung with charms swung gently, ticking like little clocks in a draught. Someone had set a new sprig of laurel near the mouth. I knelt and touched the earth that had held the plate and felt the beeswax ghost under my palm, a slickness long settled into dust. The void under the stone was gone now, filled again by time and small things. That is good. A city does not live by keeping all its holes open. Some truths sit best under the care of those who know to close a lid. By the second day, you could hear laughter in the marsh again. Fishermen stood knee-deep with their nets and spoke about eels. Boys dared each other to run the length of a low wall without falling. Someone trained a goat, badly, to pull a little sled. The ordinary returned with its steady wealth. In the shadow of a holm oak, I found Faustulus mending a strap. He did not ask me questions he knew I could not answer outside of the dream's reason. He knew enough. "You did well," I said. He squinted at the leather, then at me, one eye half closed. "No," he said, smiling a little at his own fingers, which had done this many times. "The boys did well. The women did well. The gods did not mind being asked in public. I held the line while they made up their minds." He tugged the strap, tested it, nodded. "It is enough," I agreed. "It will have to be enough for a long time." He lifted his crook and gestured toward the field. "You can tell a city by its sound," he said. "Anger has a clatter to it. Peace makes a low hum." We listened together. He was right. It sounded like bees. It sounded like a mill turning. It sounded like sleep. I walked back toward the altar of Consus at dusk, when the slant light laid everything open and kind. Acca Laurentia stood alone by the low space where we had hidden the pieces. She met my eye and knew I had come to look once more. "We will keep them," she said, not making it a question. "Women keep the small, heavy things, grain, keys, memories that make trouble if men wave them around. We will bring them out when a girl asks why this place is for her too, not before." "That is a good rule," I said. She tucked a strand of hair back under her scarf. "You leave now?" "Soon," I said. "It is always soon. Even when the dream lingers like honey on the tongue, it slides." The cicadas softened their soar, and the light thinned. I stood on the platform one last time, and the red furrow I had drawn had gone pale but not vanished. My finger found it, and I traced what was left. Nothing in a city is permanent in the way rock is, but lines can be renewed. People walk them, and the steps darken them again. I felt the pull begin, that steady loosening that comes when a case is finished, and the world is content to let you go. I looked at Hersilia across the crowd. She stood with Titus Tatius now, and he leaned in to hear her speak. Romulus had his head bowed toward a child who held out a frog cupped in two careful hands. The frog looked unimpressed and very alive. Faustulus was nowhere to be seen, which was fitting. Some men belong to the shadows. They teach us to look up and to look down and to stand in the middle with our eyes open. The polished shield at my thigh slowly became the glow of brass in lamplight. The smell of laurel faded into the faint perfume of old paper and rain. The platform's plank under my foot turned into the worn rung of my chair. I let the dream fold like a cloak and set it aside. I opened my eyes to my study. The rain had not stopped, it had become a hush. My brass desk lamp made a calm pool of light. The hearth had settled into a good bed of red coals, whispering now and then as a log cracked inward and made itself comfortable. The tame clock kept its gentle tick, a heartbeat that could not hurry even if you begged it to. On the velvet pad, the bronze sliver waited. The letters FAVST were what they had been, but the mind loves to finish what the hand cannot. I saw the rest easily now. FAVST VLVS. The incised marks on the shard, the three birds and the furrow were no longer a puzzle. They were a record of a morning when time moved in 3 steps, when men listened to birds, and a common hand began a line kings would keep. I unrolled Dr. Livia Orphe's charcoal rubbing, the concentric rings, the little plough, the numbers in a script too early to be Roman numerals, all found their places. The 1 and 2 birds sat where I knew they would, before 6, before 12. The order made a soft, satisfying click in the mind, like a lock catching and a door choosing to open. I leaned back in my chair. The poppy in the tea had done its work, and the pipe's last curl had found the corner where smoke seems to want to be. Everything was in order. The case had been carried from a wet map tube in the hands of a woman who needed sleep, through a cave that breathed old air, into a field where 3 swallows had drawn a picture anyone could understand. There was nothing left to sort, only the night. The rain hushed on the window. The city outside was a suggestion. The world had decided, for this hour at least, to be quiet. I set 2 fingers lightly on the bronze shard, as if it were a pulse. It slowed under my touch, or perhaps I did. Soft wind down. The room is a safe harbour. The lamp glows the way a steadfast friend does, warm and patient. The window holds a sheet of water that the streetlight turns to silk. The sound of rain folds over itself like layers of a blanket, a steady weight that keeps out what is needed. The hearth has stopped pretending to be ablaze. It is itself now, a bed of embers. They are small suns in a shallow valley. They sink and settle and slide closer to one another. Now and then, a whisper. Now and then, a sigh. Nothing to prove, nothing asked of you. Beyond the glass, thunder speaks far away. Not angry, not even stern. More like a lion at the edge of a dream, rumbling because it is content to be itself. It says, I am here. You are inside. The world is bigger than both of us, and this night is for rest. If you close your eyes, you can bring back, very gently, the Palatine grasses. They are beaded with dew. Each dot is a small lens holding the sky. A fox moves through them without a sound, its tail a brush painting the air. It knows you are there, and it is worried. You are not here to chase. You are here to watch the way dew seems to hum in the first light. A kite wheels twice, unhurried. Its wings barely tilt. It does not need to flap. It sits on the air, and the air rises to hold it. 1, then 2. The pattern is simple and deep. You do not need to count after that. The sky knows the sequence and carries it for you. The river is broad and glass. It has that little skin the evening puts on water, the way a cup can tremble and hold at the same time. The river breathes slower than we do. We can borrow its tempo. In for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The breath arrives like a friendly guest. Out for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The breath leaves slowly, not because it must, but because it can. Again, in for 4. The air is cool at the edges and warm when it rests. Out for 6. A little heavier at the end, like the last apple falling from a branch when it is ready. Your shoulders know what to do when given a hint. They drop a fraction, and then, pleased with the effect, a fraction more. The jaw loosens, the tongue finds the roof of the mouth, then lets go and rests like a leaf on water. The hands are heavy, the forearms are heavy. The elbows want to sink into the cushion the way stones find the riverbed and decide to stay there a while. The faint scent of laurel lingers, not sharp now, only clean. It sits with the smell of rain-damp paper, a good book half read and happy to wait its turn. The two together make a new smell that says thinking is finished for the night. What needs remembering will be here in the morning, as steady as the desk under your fingertips. If a thought comes, it is small and polite. It walks across the room and sits in a chair and closes its eyes. It does not ask you to get up. It does not wave its arms. It hums once and then dissolves into the soft background, the way a flock dissolves into a sky when you stop trying to count individual wings. Listen, the rain has changed its tune. It is softer now, as if each drop has to search a little to find its place on the glass. it finds it. They all do. The window does not have to choose between them. It holds them all until they slide down together and rejoin whatever river waits below. You can do the same with the day. You do not have to choose which moment to keep and which to let go. They will all find their way on their own. Imagine the city to be asleep and safe. Huts with reed roofs, smoke curled up and out through clever holes. A dog turns once and drops, snoring in the spot where the heat still lingers. A child sighs in a low cot and kicks a heel against a blanket and smiles a sleep smile. Only children manage. Somewhere, someone turns a cup upside down to keep a beetle out. Somewhere else, Larentia lays her hand on a stone and feels it cool and solid and says nothing because nothing needs say. In for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The valley is quiet. The hills attend. Even the birds agree to wait until morning to argue about anything. The kite has folded its wings and tucked its head and become a tidy shape on a branch that knows just how to hold it. Everything is arranged for you. You have nothing to do. You are under the same soft rule as the river and the rain and the ember that has decided to be dark. Rest comes like a careful hand placing a warm cloth over your eyes. It does not press. It simply rests there and you accept it, because this is the hour made for that acceptance. If you must think a last thought, let it be this. The line is straight, the truth is kept, and the night is kind. Good night.